I'm really quite excited to share this work that I've been involved in for the past few years. Again, my name is Ifoma Ebo. I'm here representing my own personal design studio, Creative Urban Alchemy. But then also I'm representing as a board member of the Black Space Urbanist Collective, and I'll talk a bit about that organization. So this is just a brief agenda for what I plan to share with you today. I first want to start with just giving an overview of the Black Space Urbanist Collective, and more specifically, our Black Space Manifesto. I'll also give an intro to work that I did as a part of the New York City Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, a part of the Mayor's Action Plan for Neighborhood Safety, addressing neighborhood safety through the built environment. I'll also share some case studies and design-based approaches to community safety, as well as a bit of the program outcomes of this neighborhood safety program in New York City. So first I want to start with Black Space. We are a collective of architects, urbanists, planners, artists, designers. We recognize that cities are quite dynamic and require a multifaceted approach to addressing issues, and we're very passionate about working in Black communities and specifically, and addressing issues in Black communities. Our mission is that we demand a present and future where Black people, Black spaces, and Black culture matter and thrive, and this is infused into everything that we do. We engage with existing community activations in an effort to address how to address community development in specific communities. This was some work that we did in Brownsville community, which is a historic African-American community in Brooklyn, New York. We also prototype designs to activate Black space. We co-produced a co-designing Black neighborhood heritage conservation playbook to support communities and really addressing cultural heritage in all of their work. We also collaborate with community and institutional partners to deliver customized learning and restorative urbanist experiences. We've taught at Cornell University. We've had partnerships with the American Institute of Architects, as well as various conferences nationally. We have chapters in Chicago and in Oklahoma City, and we also have chapters starting in North Carolina and Atlanta, and it continues to grow as more and more Black urbanists across the nation are really passionate about doing this type of work. I want to center the Black Space Manifesto through engagement work that we did in Brownsville community in New York. Over the course of a year, we came up with a series of 14 principles that we thought were really important for architects and planners working in Black communities to be able to design with dignity, equity, and really centered in community empowerment. And so as I talk about the case studies of projects that have used a design-based approach for community safety, I'm also going to center the Black Space Manifesto as, describing what is happening, the kind of process that was embedded in that work. And so these principles are really, they cover issues around wealth, heritage, culture, historic injustice, really all of the main ingredients that are really evolving around Black communities today. And I want to start with this quote from Eric Klinenberg in his book, Palaces for the People, where he talks about social infrastructure. This was really the approach that we took towards transforming public spaces in the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. And he talks about social infrastructure being not your home or your work, but it's those in-between places, the parks, your public spaces, your streets, your libraries, is the places where community comes together. It's where social bonds are formed. And really, the thriving of those spaces are important for communities, particularly when they're grappling with emergencies, with devastations such as a pandemic, or even such as flooding, that it's important for social infrastructure to be maintained and to be cultivated. I also want to bring about this notion of justice. And when I talk about justice in this presentation, it's quite multifaceted. And there's this definition that Spacesl has created that talks about, distributive justice, and that it's about, equity, making sure that you're providing quality and excellence to places that need it most. That in the process, and it's procedural, in the process of implementing projects, that you're ensuring that the process is equitable, that it's just process, people are involved in that process, that the project that you actually implement encourages people to be interactional. It also, that the final product also represents the people that are that are living with that environment, that have to interact with it on a regular basis. It reflects their history, their culture of the community members. And also that there's an ethic of care, that, you know, the projects encourage people to care for one another in different and more robust ways. So I'm now honing in on the work that I've done as a part of the Mayor's Action Plan for Neighborhood Safety. We worked in 15 public housing developments throughout New York City. You can see them on this map. And they're all grappling with crime. And this is not to say that New York City, that crime is plaguing the entire city, but it's really concentrated in key areas. And the reason why it's concentrated in these areas is because these areas have been manufactured concentration of poverty. That's essentially the story of public housing, I would say, you know, across the country. And, you know, the tie that binds many of these communities is that they're also grappling with overcrowded housing, high poverty rate, high unemployment rate. Like, these are the ingredients of why crime occurs in these particular communities. It's not because people live in public housing. It's not because they're low income. It's because there's been a historic system of neglect, marginalization, and institutional racism that has led to the environments that they are living in today. And so the premise behind the work that was done as a part of this Mayor's Action Plan was really to recognize that this was just the underlying issues occurring in these communities. And it was important to grapple with those key issues as opposed to grappling with addressing the crime itself, really get to the root of the issue to really, you know, address it at its source. So this is a map of Brownsville, Brooklyn. I mentioned it before. It's a historic African-American community in New York. The map on the left is a map of gang lines. So each color represents a different gang line. And the map on the right is from the New York City Police Department crime map. Each of the circles represents, you know, a call to information about a 911 call about crime. So each of those circles represents a different crime that happened. And it's always associated with a street intersection. And so I show these two maps because I'm emphasizing the fact that, you know, when you visit a community, you don't see these things. They're invisible, but they're actually very well known intimately to the community members that live there. And that makes them experts in the crime that's occurring in their community. They know where the gang lines lie. They know that, you know, someone was shot on that corner or someone was accosted in another corner. They know these stories, but you wouldn't know it when you first approach, you first visit a community. So I also want to talk about just, you know, this principle of censoring the lived experience, you know, also acknowledging that community members are experts in their community and that we should always censor the lived experience in any work that we're doing, particularly as it relates to crime prevention and community safety. And the approach that we had at the mayor's office was neighborhood activation, really thinking about how to activate social networks, how to activate the places and spaces in a community so that you can create a network of safe spaces and a network of community leaders that are at the forefront of addressing community safety. And this work was very research driven. There's a significant amount of research that connects community safety with public space transformation. For example, more greening of environments reduces anxiety and aggression for people, and that can lead to, you know, positive safety outcomes. Having innovative ways of lighting the night in a community can also lead to more people coming out and walking the streets and therefore having more like eyes on the street. So this was a lot of the research that was sort of the underpinnings behind a lot of the strategies that we came up with through this program. And they also culminate in this idea of what is a safe space? What are the ingredients of a safe space? And through this research and engaging with communities, we identified, and we did this work in partnership with Studio Gang, which is a design firm based in Chicago. We identified 6 key ingredients of a safe space. And this all derived out of just like understanding what are the root issues in a community that leads to people feeling aggression, feeling like they don't want to, they're committing crimes, or they're feeling like they have no other alternative but to commit a crime. And so really thinking about how places and spaces in a community can address these multifaceted needs. For example, in the first circle, you see youth engagement, health, wealth, and wellness, culture, and community. You know, imagine that there is a community center that only addresses these particular needs. but it doesn't address the holistic needs of a community. And through design and planning and programming, you can expand the use of that particular space to address violence prevention, small businesses, environment, and that in itself is steps towards creating a safe space in that community. You can imagine that if you now take a library, a public housing development, a barber shop, and you infuse them with this idea, this ideology, and throughout an entire neighborhood, you now have a network of places and spaces that create new programs to connect people through partnerships. And this in itself is the activation of a neighborhood. And then there are also tools for thinking about your public assets, your libraries, your post offices, your public housing, the assets that are controlled by government, your public streets, and how they can be transformed to address safe routes in the community by expanding their programming into the public realm, their civic front yard. And then also connecting them and thinking about the streets themselves as spaces and places to be activated as well. So you're now having safe routes connected to safe places, and that also in itself is neighborhood activation. So an example is this library. This is the Brownsville Library. You can see there's fencing around it. It looks like a fortress. It's sort of saying to me, don't come in here. This place is not safe, hence the need for all this fencing. And so how can we really think about transforming this library into a new hub for opportunity? And this image itself really shows how that can happen, right? Really thinking about the public realm as integral to the library itself. Programming can spill out. You can have places where people can sit, engage with one another, store their bicycles, jog, read a book, have children's programming outside. It really, you really think about activating the space outside of that library, but then also it contributes to safe routes through the neighborhood. So planning with, designing with is really another important principle of the Black Space Manifesto, meeting people where they are, like going to existing festivals, going to the schools, going to where young people hang out and engaging them on topics and issues as it relates to community safety, perhaps even working at local community centers, but really understanding that you need to meet people where they are in order to engage with them and plan with them and come up with ideas and strategies on how to address community safety in their particular neighborhood. And it must be unique to their neighborhood too, because oftentimes the issues of community safety can be multifaceted, they can be cultural, they can be economic, and each neighborhood is very different. So after this, I'm going to start going into some of the case studies that really present how community safety can show up differently in each neighborhood. So this is a mapping tool that we used with communities in particular, really to help them understand what is mapping, how do they map their community, and also as a tool for allowing us to understand what is their lived experience. How do they experience crime in their neighborhood? And this was a map that was created by the Tompkins houses in Brooklyn, the public housing development in Brooklyn. And you can see that the different colors represent different types of crimes, from public urination to substance sale. And then this was just undesirable activities. Then it was also important for us to work with communities to understand what are the desirable activities, where are young people hanging out, where are adults and senior citizens hanging out, and then have a conversation about how we can take this positive activity and shift it over to areas where the undesirable activity is happening. These are examples of just where some of that undesirable activity is happening. This is, stemming from a legacy of just neglect and poor infrastructure in and around public housing. You have areas where there's an abundance of trash. You have sidewalks without adequate seating and trash laid out there. You have playgrounds without adequate lighting and light. And so it's important to really reckon with this past, reckon with the fact that there are areas that have been neglected, acknowledge that they've been neglected, and then collectively work towards how to addressing that, how to transform these spaces so they can be used to support thriving communities. And so protecting and strengthening culture is also a key part of it. Like, what are the positive cultures in the community and how can you support amplifying those cultures? That's one of the important parts of this manifesto as well. And so this particular development, Butler House, is in the Bronx. You can see that the playground itself, there used to be a tot lot in this outlined area in the right-hand side. That was removed a few years ago. It's never been replaced, and therefore kids are not finding anything useful in this playground to play with. And you can imagine the playground has been taken over by others. It's been taken over by people who sell drugs. And so the community feels afraid to use this space, particularly at night. And another thing that this community is grappling with is that they have a very strong Muslim community, Latino community, and West African community, but they're all operating in silos. And they all recognize that they have issues around crime in their community. And so the resident team wanted to work together to bring these communities together so they can harness all of their energies to really address transforming this public space into a place that represents togetherness. So they came up with this vision of using art as a tool to activate this space so the kids can use it. Each of the sites gets a budget of about $40,000 to $50,000, and that covers not only the paint, but also the stewardship. It covers just the tools that they need to implement this project, but then also maintain it over the course of a year. And this was the idea. And so what transpired was just this, the beginnings of, really transforming this place into a creative place where their young people can exercise their talents and abilities. You can see that there's an image of 3 girls here in the mural, and each of those girls represents a different community culture. So one is, represents the Muslim community, another Latina community, and the other the West African community. And they have further goals and aims of taking down these fences and really opening up, beautifying this place with more green, with more flowers and mural art. But it really, this open space is now going to serve as a central place where they can begin to have more programming and really take this place back, take this space back, and not create an opportunity, eliminate opportunities for crime to happen. This is another development in the Bronx, in Mott Haven and Patterson Houses. You can see that it's, many of these developments are surrounded with fencing, they're open space in particular. And if community cohesion happens in open space, what does that mean for a community where their open spaces are surrounded with fencing? So, one of the primary things that this resident team wanted to do was take down the fences. This particular open space as well, oftentimes needles get thrown in there by addicts. And so they really wanted to address the fact that they're dealing with both mental health issues and substance abuse in their community. And how can they use this open space as a tool to deal with those things? So the thought that they had was they wanted to create a serenity garden, a place where people can have Tai Chi classes, mental health programming, have a place of respite where they can just get their mind right. And they felt that this was important to connect with nature as a part of that solution. And what resulted was this amazing partnership between Citibank, a nonprofit organization in the Bronx called Mission Continues. All of the people in black shirts are the residents of this particular development. And so now this open space represents a forum for dialogue and partnership between many organizations who have come in to help and support this resident team make this open space come alive, but then also these partnerships can forge many opportunities in the future to expand personal evolution and communal evolution. So fostering personal and communal evolution is a key principle here. It not only is about helping individuals address their substance abuse issues, but also a community of people, a community of organizations supporting one another to expand leadership and capacity. This is another image of that Serenity Garden as they used it, and this was the opening of the Serenity Garden. And they're really quite excited to use it for a number of programming, exercise, physical and mental health programming. So this is now in East Harlem. This is Wagner Houses, and you can see this really large, a really great open space. Unfortunately, it has these shipping containers in it at this really odd angle, separated by this odd angle, and people feel uncomfortable using this space or walking up by it at night because the shipping containers, they don't know what's gonna meet them on the other side of it. People are barely there. It's been deemed as the unofficial dog park because people have their dogs walking on and they let them poop in the area, but they don't pick up the poop. And so it's become a bit of an eyesore in the community, but it's such an abundant space. And so the resident team here, they really wanted to deal with that and deal with youth engagement as well. Young people are often stigmatized in efforts to address community safety. And so they thought, let's create this as a community center. Let's bring those shipping containers together, paint it a vibrant color, create an environment where we can have seating, there's vibrant colors, and it becomes a center of the community where young people can celebrate their talents and abilities. And this is the beginning of just, what that space is transforming into. You can see the containers have come together. They've now put in some concrete on the ground, and it's the beginnings of just their realizing their dreams of creating this as a center, as opposed to an eyesore in their community. And this is really about promoting excellence. There's no reason why those shipping containers should just be standing there haphazardly, and they could be used in a way that really elevates the dignity in this particular community. This is now in Staten Island, a Stapleton House's public housing development. Tennis is not a sport of choice in Stapleton in particular. And so you can see that this particular tennis court is, there's trash bags there. It doesn't get used very often. And the resident team here also realized that a lot of addicts were using this space as well. And so they wanted to really transform and activate this place to be better used, but then they wanted to create a resource hub, a place where they could cultivate a wealth of talent, resources, treasures, information, like really be able to connect into government agencies and organizations in their neighborhood that could bring resources to help them and their community address these issues around substance abuse. This was the vision that they worked on. And that vision was realized in an amazing way. They created these really awesome kiosks that they can roll out whenever they want to create a market in their community. They invite government agencies and other nonprofits to come and share, tools and resources. They have market fairs. They can support local entrepreneurs in a market. Like this tennis court has become such a flexible space to really build a wealth of knowledge in this community. This is just another example of one of the tenant resident leaders working with one of the residents in their community, just sharing information. So it's also, increasing and encouraging new social bonds to be formed. People are really getting to know each other through this type of programming. This is another example in Brownsville, Brooklyn, where, the Brownsville Houses resident team, they created a night party for their kids, and there was no sound whatsoever. The kids had headphones on, and so that was their way of getting around the rules in the park, that there was no sounds after certain hours. And so they had this stage that was lit up, and then so you can imagine there was like 500 kids out there dancing their hearts out, celebrating and amplifying Black joy. And it was amazing. It was transformative for this space. New positive memories were formed around this particular park that people were afraid to use at night. And so this was a real amazing way for this resident team to involve the rest of their community members in an amazing and celebratory event. This is another example on a public street in Brownsville. This is a public street that often, Belmont Avenue, that often at nighttime people do not want to frequent, and therefore it has an impact on the businesses on that street. So this particular cafe wanted to expand their programming into the public street. They wanted to manifest this future of the street becoming the extension of their homes. And so they created they partnered with the Department of Transportation to use two parking spaces to create this street seat. And they took it a step further by creating a jazz night. They had a jazz band come out and play music. They also had a game night on this street as well. And so it really begins to transform the way the positive memories that people have on the public street, and also see it as a place where they can hang out with their neighbors and get to know their neighbors better. This is the final example, really focusing on young people, and again, manifesting the future, using technology to manifest the future. This was a competition that we put forth, that the Brownsville Community Justice Center worked with young people in the community, particularly young people who were diverted from jail. So this was Alternatives to Incarceration program. And so the young people created all this artwork, and this was a vision that they created, that this artwork would be projected into this particular plaza. And this plaza, oftentimes, the story around it is that people did not want to frequent this place because criminals were using it. And then through artwork, the Brownsville Community Justice Center transformed this space to be more of a viable place for young people to exercise their talents and giftings. So this is the, the results of that work. They put up projections on light poles. They projected their artwork in the community. So now this space is a spectacle in the community. Through technology, people want to come there at night and see, what kind of images are they going to see? Are they going to see themselves represented in the artwork? The flashing lights, they also are based on sensors. So the more people that frequent that place, the more lights and the more projections are moving. And so it really became an amazing celebratory space where the young people could manifest the future that they saw for their community. So in all of this public space work culminated in a community playbook. Oftentimes when we walk on the street, we don't realize that the Department of Transportation runs the street, the Department of Housing runs the housing development, the parks runs the parks. And so I believe, the communities that we work in, they may not understand that there's a division in government around authority of different areas of this public space and different rules about how those spaces are to be transformed. So we brought all that information into one book to help people understand, if you want to transform your streets, your parks, your public housing, here are the rules and here are the key agency partners that you need to talk with and how you should engage with them. Because we wanted to really create circles and not lines. We want to eliminate hierarchy and really encourage government and community to work to co-create public spaces together in this effort to address community safety. So there are other resources in this book that includes a lot of the research I spoke about today, a lot of our surveying methods and evaluation methods. Okay, thank you for sharing the link. So I also just want to talk about, being humble learners who practice deep listening. The experience of measuring impact after a project is complete is important. You want to do surveys to understand, has participation in that space changed? Has the perceptions of safety and belonging changed after these programs and spaces have been transformed? Has the use in those spaces changed? And most importantly, has social cohesion, the bonds, the trust between community members, has that been enhanced through this work? Because it's those bonds that will really be the key element that supports people and helps people when there is a tragedy, when there's a tragedy. So there are also other elements of measuring impact, over the long term. Moving at the speed of trust is important, growing trust, moving together with fluidity at whatever speed is necessary. And that means really following over time, how have indicators changed in that community? How has this intervention transformed different aspects of a community, whether it's crime or health indicators, youth engagement? These are all important elements to measure and track over time, particularly in this story around community safety. So just to show just some of the information, the outcomes of the Mayor's Action Plan for Neighborhood Safety, the Mayor's Office partnered with John Jay College Research and Evaluation Center to do research on the 15 public housing developments and compare them with other public housing developments in New York over the course of 2014 to 2019. And you can see across the board that there's been significant reductions in crime, from misdemeanors to felonies to property and personal misdemeanors. So it's been quite a successful method and approach to addressing community safety in a way that infuses dignity, justice, community empowerment, and it's really community-led. It empowers people, and it's sustainable, most importantly. So I want to end with these series of additional series of principles that you also saw woven into the presentation that really are focused on public safety as well. You want to ensure that community are engaged as the real experts, prioritize young people. They are the future. They are the manifestations of the future. Whatever solutions that are put in today, they will be the ones that will mostly benefit from them. Enable those social connections. Social bonds are important in this work. Addressing the complex roots of crime. So understanding that yes, there's gun violence, but what is happening in that community? What kind of trauma and ill is happening in that community that needs to be addressed, that has led to gun violence or any other kinds of crime? Start with what's there. Start with existing assets. Start with what the community wants to work in, because that is important. You don't always have to create something new. You can always just start with what's there and improve upon that. Reduce territoriality, reduce the ability of gangs or undesirable people to come in and take over those areas. And oftentimes that may include police if people do not want police involved. Expand activity on public property. So you can see there are many examples expanding how and transforming how public space was being used. You create innovative ways of lighting the night. It doesn't always have to have like these really sharp lights. It can be really amazing and interesting and fun. And it will bring people out in a more robust way. Reduce barriers to local commerce. So really think about improving opportunities for entrepreneurs, particularly to work at night so that people feel safe using spaces at night. Invest in dignity. And important way to do that is to provide equity and maintenance, ensuring that whatever project you put in place, that you have funds and resources in place to maintain that space over the life of that project in the community, so that the quality that is in today is sustained over time. So I want to thank you again so much for this opportunity. If you have any further questions, you can reach me at my personal email address. If you have any questions about Black Space and our manifesto and the work that we do, you can email us at contact@blackspace.org. Thank you again for listening, and I'll now open it up for questions.